Before the world knew marble colonnades and papal rituals, a small rise on the edge of ancient Rome served a far humbler purpose. It was a burial ground, a place where citizens laid their dead and whispered prayers at the threshold of the afterlife. Centuries later, that same hill would become the stage for one of humanity's most powerful religious centers. Today we call it Vatican Hill, a microstate of gardens, chapels, and archives, yet it still carries the echo of that first role as a gateway between seen and unseen worlds. Walking into St. Peter's Square, you stand inside a paradox. On the surface, it is the most public space in Catholicism. Open to tourists, flooded with cameras, ringed by Bernini's embrace of columns. But the same geometry that invites also conceals. Beneath the stones run layers of tombs, foundations of older shrines, and centuries of administrative corridors. Above ground, pilgrims see symbols of openness: the obelisk, the dome, the vast piazza. Yet beneath their feet lies an entire history of secrecy, preservation, and ritual. Legends about hidden Vatican knowledge grow from this very tension. In Latin, the papal archive was simply the secretum, meaning private. Over time, as languages changed, secretum began to mean forbidden or mysterious. Out of a technical term grew the image of a sealed vault of forbidden texts. Combine that with locked doors, limited access, and the Church's long memory, and you have the perfect seedbed for myth. What is actually stored there? State papers, diplomatic letters, judicial records, missionary reports, theological debates, the paperwork of a global institution. Historians have been allowed to consult vast portions of it since the 19th century. The discoveries have been fascinating for scholars but ordinary compared to public expectation. We find negotiations with kings, not blueprints for time machines. Yet because the archive is so large and only gradually opened, people assume an even deeper level remains hidden. The human mind dislikes anticlimax. When a long-guarded secret proves mundane, we invent a further layer to keep the thrill alive. This first part of our journey looks at how that layering began. We start not with conspiracy but with context: a burial hill turned basilica, a private archive turned legend, a set of symbols that acquire double meanings over time. By understanding these origins, we see why the Vatican became a magnet for stories about secret gospels, hidden rituals, and forbidden power. As the narrative unfolds, you will meet not only popes and archivists but also the architects and artists who shaped the visual language of mystery. Egyptian obelisks crowned with crosses, mosaics patterned with numbers, guards in Renaissance uniforms at locked doors. Each of these details is perfectly explainable in history, yet each invites speculation. In the gap between explanation and imagination, a legend is born. This is where our retelling begins, at the surface of the square and just below it, where real stones and imagined secrets overlap. The moment you step beyond the tourist lens and into the history of Vatican Hill, the story stops being about locked doors and starts being about time. 2,000 years of ritual, destruction, rebuilding, and preservation have created a physical palimpsest. Every era leaves a layer, and each layer invites its own interpretation. In the 1st century, the hill was an unremarkable necropolis. Romans built family tombs here, decorated with frescoes and mosaics, inscribed with messages to the dead. When followers of Jesus began visiting the grave of Peter, the hill took on a new identity as a site of clandestine worship and martyrdom. Archaeological digs in the 20th century uncovered fragments of this world. Simple graffiti of the fish and the anchor, niches carved into walls, modest altars built over earlier graves. None of it is secret. It's published in excavation reports, but its very existence under the basilica reinforces the sense of hidden continuity. During the Middle Ages and Renaissance, the Vatican grew from a pilgrimage destination into the administrative and intellectual center of the Catholic Church. Popes commissioned libraries, observatories, and artists. Scholars from across Europe arrived with manuscripts: Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, Latin. What we now call the Vatican Library began as a working collection of texts for theological and diplomatic use. There were catalogs, scribes, lending rules. Yet the aura of secrecy grew in parallel, because access was limited to insiders. Outsiders glimpsed vast shelves and imagined forbidden gospels. The truth was less exotic but more impressive. A central hub preserving fragments of the world's cultures at a time when many libraries were destroyed by war or neglect. This dynamic, ordinary function versus extraordinary reputation, is visible in the Church's approach to dangerous knowledge. Astrology, angelology, and natural magic circulated widely in medieval Europe. Some clerics condemned them, others engaged cautiously. Popes consulted astronomers for calendars and coronation dates while condemning sorcery in canon law. To later storytellers, this contradiction became fodder for legend, a pope secretly practicing the very arts he prohibited. In reality, it reflected the messy process of integrating ancient learning into a Christian framework. The built environment amplified the mystique. Bernini's colonnade encircling St. Peter's Square was meant as an embrace, yet from above it forms a key-like outline. The obelisk at the center once stood in Egypt, then in Nero's circus, then was moved to its present place in 1586. For Catholics, it symbolizes Christ's triumph over paganism. For conspiracy-minded writers, it signals a hidden Egyptian code. Both readings live side by side in public imagination. Even the guards contribute to the effect. The Swiss Guards' striped uniforms are a Renaissance revival, not a code of secret society membership. But a locked door with a colorful guard in front of it makes a perfect photograph for a blog about Vatican mysteries. A single image can say more than a paragraph of explanation. By mid-20th century, when scholars gained controlled access to the apostolic archive, the pattern was set. Every disclosure produced new questions about what remained sealed. Historians published detailed inventories of papal correspondence, financial ledgers, and diplomatic reports. Yet on the internet and in popular books, the focus shifted to what they still aren't showing. The legend became self-sustaining. The more ordinary the revealed material, the more extraordinary the imagined remainder. Understanding this history does not kill the fascination. It reframes it. The Vatican's mystique is not built on hidden magic but on continuity, symbolism, and the psychology of secrecy. It is a living example of how institutions accumulate myths simply by surviving long enough and controlling access to their own memory. In this part of our retelling, we have moved from the hill's earliest graves to its libraries and symbols, from the reality of preservation to the imagination of forbidden power. What emerges is a portrait of a place where the ordinary and the legendary overlap, not because of deception but because of our human tendency to fill gaps in knowledge with story. By the time the Vatican emerged as a microstate in the 20th century, its reputation as a vault of hidden knowledge was already woven into global culture. The more the Church opened parts of its collection, the more the public imagined a deeper layer. This third section looks at how those myths crystallized, the archetypes they reflect, and the symbols that keep them alive. One of the most persistent themes is the forbidden manuscript. Popular books and films portray popes locking away dangerous texts, a gospel too radical, a prophecy too explosive, a scientific device too powerful. In reality, the documents most often sealed for decades are mundane. Personnel files, sensitive diplomatic cables, or case files from ecclesiastical courts. They are restricted for privacy or preservation, not because they predict the end of the world. But secrecy and sacredness share similar visual cues. Heavy doors, wax seals, Latin labels. From the outside, the difference between prudence and occultism blurs. Numbers, animals and objects also reinforce the aura. 3s, 7s and 12s recur in Christian art, echoing earlier cosmologies. Doves, lions, serpents, bees. Each has layers of meaning. A papal crest with 3 bees is just a family emblem to an archivist but a hint of alchemy to an esotericist. Floor mosaics shaped like stars or zodiacs look like code to some visitors, like decoration to others. The Vatican has never hidden these symbols. It inherited them from the cultures in which Christianity took root. Yet their survival creates the impression of deliberate encoding. Ritual adds another layer. The liturgical calendar mirrors the natural year. Advent in winter, Easter in spring, Pentecost near harvest. These rhythms came from Judaism but also parallel older agricultural festivals. To believers, they dramatize salvation history. To skeptics, they look like a camouflage for pagan rites. Even the white smoke of a papal conclave, a purely practical signal, is read online as a secret alchemical symbol. Transparency feeds curiosity rather than ending it. Architecture does the same. The Vatican museums are arranged by papal patronage rather than theme, creating unexpected juxtapositions. Visitors trace energy lines across marble floors or see the city plan as a giant key. Once a pattern is drawn on a map, it becomes hard to unsee. The myth does not require the pattern to be deliberate, only visible. Psychologically, these stories express our ambivalence about authority. We want a wise guardian of dangerous knowledge. We also fear manipulation. The Vatican's age, art, and ritual make it an ideal screen for both hopes and suspicions. Even people with no connection to Catholicism project their cultural anxieties onto its walls. What is remarkable is how adaptable the myth has been. In the Enlightenment, the rumor was that the Pope hoarded scientific instruments. In the Romantic era, it was forbidden gospels. In the Cold War, it was files on communism or aliens. In the digital age, it is time travel machines or suppressed data. The setting stays the same. The script updates with each generation's obsessions. This part of our condensed retelling shows the Vatican not as a villain or hero but as a mirror. It reflects whatever each age longs for or fears. Lost wisdom, hidden power, ultimate answers. That mirror quality explains why myths about the Vatican persist even when specific claims are debunked. As the legends evolved, two master stories began to dominate popular imagination. The first is the tale of a papal pact of power. A secret formula, rite or device that would grant influence beyond the natural. The second is the story of a hidden gospel. A text so radical it would overturn hierarchy if released. Neither is supported by evidence, but both function as miniature dramas that explain our hopes and fears about authority. In the first drama, a pope or cardinal discovers a manuscript in a collapsing monastery or a dusty vault, sometimes described as angelic invocations, sometimes as Egyptian rites, sometimes as a lost Greek treatise on theurgy. He reads it by candlelight, prays for guidance, and then seals it until the last trumpet sounds. The image is cinematic. Marble floor tiled with zodiac signs, beeswax candles flickering, guards outside the door. It is also archetypal. Cultures everywhere tell of guardians holding dangerous tools. In the Vatican version, the Pope becomes not only shepherd of souls but keeper of a sealed box of power. This narrative resonates because there really was a gray zone in medieval and Renaissance thought between natural philosophy, angelology, and magic. Figures like Ficino and Pico tried to reconcile Christian theology with Hermetic ideas. Popes sponsored astronomers to fix calendars. Even as the Church condemned sorcery, it engaged with forms of knowledge later called occult. The myth of a papal pact is a dramatization of that tension. The second drama flips the polarity. Here the Vatican is not hoarding power but suppressing liberation. The supposed Book of the Nazarene, or Gospel of the Beloved Disciple, teaches radical equality and direct experience of the divine without intermediaries. If released, say the stories, it would erase hierarchy. Again, there is no trace of such a document in the archives, but apocryphal writings do exist. The Gospels of Thomas, Mary, and Judas, discovered not in Rome but in desert caves. Each new find feeds the narrative that something even more explosive must still be locked away. Both minifilms satisfy psychological needs. The Pact of Power expresses our fear of misused technology. The Hidden Gospel our hope for a liberating disclosure. One casts the Church as secretly mighty, the other as secretly reformist. Together they form a yin and yang of Vatican mythology. They also show how myths about power tell us as much about ourselves as about their supposed subject. In reality, the Vatican's secrecy is diplomatic and administrative. The Apostolic Archive holds state papers, correspondence, investigations, the normal paperwork of an institution. But diplomatic privacy lacks drama. The public imagination substitutes forbidden power. Once a stage exists, stories will fill it. This fourth part of our condensed retelling gives you the core of those dramas without the 90-minute sprawl. Two archetypal stories, their historical roots and why they persist. They are not literal history but mirrors of our ambivalence toward authority and knowledge. Step back now from the candlelit manuscripts and marble corridors and look at the Vatican as it is. A tiny walled city with gardens, museums, and offices, sitting quietly inside Rome. It is one of the most photographed and studied places on earth, yet still carries the aura of a mystery. In this closing part, we pull the threads together and see what the legends about hidden knowledge actually tell us. First, they reveal the power of continuity. Vatican Hill has been a burial ground, a shrine, a basilica, a palace, a museum, and now a microstate. That unbroken history invites projection. People imagine that if the institution has lasted so long, its walls must hold ancient power. In reality, they hold paper, art, and stone. But paper, art, and stone can themselves be powerful when they link generations. Second, they show how symbols work. Obelisks, keys, vestments, numbers, animals, and rituals are not ciphers in a secret code but living signs in a tradition that constantly reinterprets its past. Because symbols carry multiple meanings, they act like mirrors. A skeptic sees occult traces, a believer sees sacred heritage, a novelist sees a plot. The same object sustains all three readings. Third, they illustrate how secrecy works. Every large organization keeps some things private. In the Vatican, that ordinary privacy has been magnified by translation quirks, secret archive, restricted access for preservation, and centuries of polemic. Out of these prosaic facts, a mythology of vaults, pacts, and hidden gospels has grown. The myths are not literally true, but they dramatize real questions about how knowledge should be handled. Is their wisdom too dangerous to share? Can secrecy ever be virtuous? What does it mean to guard tradition in an age that demands transparency? Fourth, they show how myths escape their birthplace and enter culture. Journalists use white smoke for corporate decisions. Thriller writers model conspiracies on conclaves. Video games let players explore fictional Vatican catacombs. Even metaphors for non-religious secrecy, hidden files, lost libraries, forbidden archives, owe something to Rome. The Vatican is not only a subject of myth, it has become a template for myth-making. Finally, they show more about us than about the Vatican. Myths about hidden knowledge reveal our mixed feelings about authority, our craving for ultimate answers, our hope that someone somewhere already knows. In the Pact of Power, we see our fear of misused science. In the hidden gospel, we see our hope for a liberating disclosure. In the symbols, we see our own urge to weave continuity from fragments. The Vatican's walls simply give these longings a stage grand enough to be credible. If you walk through St. Peter's Square with this perspective, the place looks different. The obelisk becomes a witness to cultural layering rather than a clue to secret magic. The colonnade becomes an embrace welcoming pilgrims rather than hiding mysteries. The dome becomes a beacon of continuity rather than a lid on a vault. The actual archives, far from being dungeons of sorcery, are a testament to preservation. A rare example of an institution trying, however imperfectly, to remember the past in a world that forgets. Does that mean the Vatican is demystified? Not entirely. Mystery is not only about secrecy. It is also about awe. Standing beneath Michelangelo's ceiling or in the dim necropolis below the basilica, one feels a genuine sense of threshold. Not because of hidden spells, but because of the depth of history, art, and human devotion concentrated in one place. That awe is a kind of mystery worth keeping, the kind that inspires curiosity rather than fear. This is the essence of our shorter retelling. The Vatican as a real place, a living museum of symbols, a magnet for myths, and a mirror for our own imaginations. By understanding how the legend formed, we don't lose the wonder, we gain a clearer view of it.